Welcome back to Faith and Fire. On today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about how we put our faith into action in the community. So a while back, we had an episode where we sat with two wonderful individuals who talked to us a little bit about what our churches need from the community and what the community needs from the church. And within that conversation, we had a great high-level discussion of, what is that symbiotic relationship between the church and the community? But we really didn't dive into how do we as people of faith show up in the community and put our faith into action. So I've gotten together today with two individuals who are very active in the community in their own ways. And I want to have a conversation about how their faith journey plays out as they're out in the community every day, making a difference. So with me today, I have Rell and Richard. Welcome.
Hey. Good to be here.
Yes. Okay. So I know y'all are super active in the community. So let's start there. Talk to me a little bit about what is your faith? What's your community involvement? What does that look like? And we can dive into kind of getting to know you a little bit, and then we'll see how does that show up. So Rell, Richard's. He's ready.
We both went. What's my faith, right? So, I follow Christ, right, through the vehicle of Christianity. From a weekly standpoint, right, as far as what my everyday regimen is, denominationally, I'm an African Methodist Episcopal, which is the oldest Black religion in the United States. But that's all the titles and all that stuff, right? At the end of the day, what does it look like to really follow Christ and put that in action? They say, faith without works is dead. So, and I very much believe in being alive. That's kind of important.
Yeah.
And so, from that context, I would say, because you were talking about the journey of that is there's not an aha moment for me.
Okay.
Right. There's just not this moment when all of a sudden it all clicked and it was all important. Right. It was no, this has been my life's breath. Right. When it comes to from my adolescent years forward, spirituality has always been my water. Right. Ooh. And I've always sought to be Michael Phelps in that regard. Right. So and so just naturally swimming in that particular space. And similarly, so then within that, working in community, working for humanity, working to create the kingdom, right, and do kingdom work has always been what the goal has been, right? So it's what do you want to be when you grow up? It's always been about impact. It's never been about you want to do things that possibly accumulate a certain level of comfort for your life, but it's really always been about impact. And so I consider myself a recovering impactivist, right?
Okay.
And so being addicted to creating impact.
Yeah.
Right. And that being how impact is a part of how I worship. Right. Ooh, so community is about how I worship, existing in community. Right. And so it's not just when you're talking about how are you active in community, it's really how are you active in the world and what does that look like and how are you doing various things to create kingdom in that space. And so that's how I pursue my calling is through the work.
That's beautiful. It's funny when you said that. I know I've known you since you were younger, but not since you were young.
Yeah, but I've known you since you were young.
I was young.
You were young.
But I just pictured 5-year-old Richard being I want to be a community worship leader. And I could totally see that. Was that you?
No, then I wanted to be a lawyer, but
I'm a lawyer.
Creating, but the reason I decided not to do law was ultimately I was in order to really make money as a lawyer, I'm going to have to sell my soul.
Integrity.
Right.
Yep.
And so then it was really about so how do I do this thing that was always called the work, mm-hmm. right? That nobody could tell you. Before 2008, nobody knows what a community organizer is, right? Barack Obama shows up. He says, I'm a community organizer. And you're oh, that's what that thing is, right? And then they really still couldn't tell you how to become that, right? And so, a lot of my life's pursuit was around understanding, how do I get to do this? Because there's all these people that are in my life that are doing that work, but they can't tell me how they do it, right? Ultimately, because it's God breathed it, right? And God created the path. And so, it was around, how did God create the path to do the work that ultimately a lot of people aren't going to understand when you're doing the work in that particular way because it's peculiar, right? Because it's not capitalism, right? You can do conscious capitalism, but it's not capitalism. You know what I'm saying? Go ahead, brother, because I hear
No, go.
But yeah, so I mean, but that's what it's always been. It's always been about doing the work and like, what does that look like? And so like, there's ways that I do that now from a professional means because I finally figured out how to do it. But
how do you do it?
So I wear many different hats, right? So my T'Challa work is I am the director of programs for the Human Services Campus, now known as Keys to Change. I oversee all of our work as the lead agency for adult homelessness in Maricopa County. I oversee all of our work countywide, right? So I'm solving homelessness at a systems level every single day, right? Then another hat that I wear, I'm also the lead for an organization called Foresight Foundation for Economic Equity, which is an emerging CDFI. I oversee all of our real estate development and affordable and supportive housing work. So I'm doing that so that we're not just talking about like the vernacular standpoint of like, how do you buy the block, but how do you really actually buy the block? Right? What does that really look like to do everything from affordable housing to like, what does a Black Verado look like, right? And like, how do we be able to do that? Then other hat, right? Like I'm also from a community organizer standpoint, I'm also one of those people that are working behind the scenes, working with your favorite community leader or elected to figure out like, how do we actually hold power accountable? Right, from a community standpoint. Right?
Boots to the ground type thing.
Yeah, boots to the ground and boots to the boardroom. Right? What does it look like in both spaces? Because we have to be able to figure out like, yes, like if somebody's marching, right? Because there's power in marching, right?
Yeah.
But power in marching is about creating tension in the mayor's office, who's then like, what do we do? And you're like, okay, well, this is what you can do, right? And so how do we then move from conversation to, again, that I word, impact?
I love that you talk about both of them because I think we have the conversation a lot about not everybody is a head. Some people, you may be the head, you may be the arm, you may be the leg, right? It takes all of the different parts to really encompass the movement, right?
Correct.
And when you hit the boardroom, that's where I'm at. I am not the marcher. I am the person behind the scenes, like, in those rooms, helping get funding places through my businesses, things like that, opportunities. So I love that.
Outside strategies.
Yes.
Yeah, somebody's got to coordinate that and figure out like, how do we actually move and do that? And how do we translate the old guard conversation to the new school Black Lives Matter conversation? And then like from even the Black Lives Matter conversation to the like completely unaffiliated conversation, like what does that look like in that stream to like who translates from all of those spaces so that we can understand what we need to do to be able to move as a community? And
understanding that they all contribute to the bigger picture.
Yes. Yeah.
I love this. Okay, I need to revisit something. Your first hat was T'Challa. Are you the new Black Panther? What is that?
No, so like, because by day, T'Challa does his work when it comes to...
Is that a person?
No, like the Black Panther, T'Challa, right? So during the day, he's T'Challa. He's the
actual person.
This is his day job.
Yes.
That's his day job is to be
your day job hat.
The president of Wakanda, right?
Bruce Wayne versus Batman.
Yes.
I got it. I get it now.
Yeah.
I was
like Bruce Wayne and Batman is whack versus T'Challa and Black Panther.
No, I love it. I just needed that last little bit connected for me. We all know how it goes.
Yeah.
There's your nugget.
There you go.
Okay. I'm loving all of the synergy and I want to dive in more. But Rell, I'd love to hear from you. Rell's like, I'm ready to dive in too.
I was like, after that, I'm over in that lane over there. That's what I want to dive in. But no, I love all of that. So my faith is of course Christian based. One of the things is I grew up in a lot of denominations. So Baptist, AME, Done Jehovah's Witness, back to just centralizing my faith of what I believe in, concretizing that piece there. So again, the roots of everything that I am is AME. That was one of the things where it helped me identify who I am, but more so life kind of took a turn for me to determine how do I show up in the world. So in regards to my impact of what I've done, so I partner with a lot of organizations. So my breakthrough, well, I would say, so to speak, was in ideally 2016. When I started to identify the relationships that I was doing, in the workspace of the company that I was in, I saw how much of an impact that I was making. Well, how influential was I making with that impact? So I was like, well, if I can make this change in the workplace, what can I do for my community? And then it took me to a center place of, well, what am I doing currently in the community now? So I started working with a lot of organizations because, again, to your point, I wanted to sit at the board level. I became director of a lot of different nonprofits. So again, sitting on the boards for like 100 Black men, sitting on the boards of, Boys and Girls Club, YWCA, YMCA, and doing a lot of partnering. And again, my role was, how am I really influencing hope? I wanted to be a beacon of hope for those that needed that hope. And the change of that is, I used the ism, did I want to use a spoon or a ladle? You help me with that one. And understanding that piece then, how am I serving my community? Am I truly making an impact? So for me, it was more than just being able to be a visionary, but I also needed to know how to execute those things. And that's one of the things where I was doing effectively, because understanding like things from the strategic level coming up there from the governance standpoint, but it also had to be operational and tactical, understanding that, and then working with the community, being a voice for the voiceless. So for me, it was being boots to the ground, helping people understand how to pave the way. For me, there's no difference between a big L and a little L in regards of a leader. The number one job of a leader is to make more leaders. So by doing so, you had to show up each and every day. And that's one thing that I did. By partnering myself with a lot of different organizations, I will say that it was a burnout for me. But one thing that I attest to that is 24 hours in a day. There's no way that no one can find time to give 1 inch of what they do to an organization. That was powerful for me. But to truly own that and live that lifestyle was to be even more impactful. Now, in my current day-to-day operation, I'm now sitting as the community outreach chair for the Greater Phoenix Urban League of Young Professionals. A lot of what I do now is looking at what's happening within the community, looking at how we give back, how we serve, how we organize and identify awareness, evangelize what's happening within our community, and strengthen our community. One of the things that we like to do is we look at the food bank. We look at the blood drives. We look at all of these opportunities to really not just reflect around the Black skin, but the Black and brown skin and other skins. So again, for us to truly diversify what we're doing, but make an impact for all of the ones that surround us that don't have a voice and need help in the community.
Okay. So this is so interesting. And I love hearing both of your journeys because they're very similar, but they're very different, like in terms of how you serve the community, what spaces you operate in. But across both of those, I mean, how do you see your faith really playing in? Like, Richard, I heard you say that your faith work and your community work are like hand in hand, tandem, and that it's kind of always been that way. And, Michael Phelps. But
yeah. So like, Dr. Cornel West talks about justice is what love looks like in public, right? And so if God is love, then like I've got to then what I'm trying to do when I'm doing justice work is bring God into the space, right? Or just tap in because God's already there, right? And so like, how do I do that, right?
Yes.
How do I do that? How do I do that in a way that, right now I feel like Christianity often gets a bad rap, right? Because like Christianity gets tied into Christian nationalism and all these other pieces and evangelical pieces and like, there's a lot of pieces with the church right now that like hold toxicity, right? And so I have to then acknowledge that, but say like, okay, so like, let me show you what Jesus really looks like in this space, right? And so what Jesus really looks like in this space is just love, right? And so like my faith is walking in all of those spaces because I've got to work with atheists, got to work with folks that are Buddhists, that are Baha'is, that are all kinds of different faiths, right? And it's not to get into a space where like, well, my God's better than yours. Like what is that?
That was a really cool voice to say that in. Like I almost wouldn't be offended if you said that to me in that voice.
Or you'd be highly offended, right? Because,
depends on the lane you're in.
Yeah, depends on the lane that you're in and like what your triggers are because of how does somebody beat you over the head with that and like chase you out of the church, right? And so like I've got to be able to show people something that's different. Yeah. Right? So that this way, like if I'm going to be a light and I want people to like, that's evangelism, right? That's the thing like, oh, what's that thing about you? Right? And it's like, well, like I'm operating in these spaces because like ultimately I believe that God allows me to be in the space. And that's the blessing that God brought me into the space. Right. And God can also take me out of the space. Right. And so I'm prayerful that like that the right doors open. right? That I walk through the right doors, and that when I'm in the room, then ultimately, like, I've got to be able to know that, like, I've got a duty as a result of being in the room. So it's not good enough to just be there and to be quiet, right?
Exactly.
There's far too many rooms that you think about, like, you get called to the room, to the space, to the table, to the whatever, right? And there's certain folks that are just quiet. Right. And like, so when I think of that term, like giving voice to the voiceless.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to even like flip that on its head. Right. And really think about, because if we're talking about like speaking truth to power. Right. Then ultimately, like, no, like the folks that are often seen as grassroots have a voice. That voice deserves to be heard at the table. The voiceless really are those that tend to be like ultra powerful, that just sit quietly, and that they're voiceless in the space.
Yes.
Right? Like if you think about, think about any community forum that you've gone to, right?
Yeah.
Like the happiest moment for anybody that's feeling oppressed, or the moment, like, is the moment they get the mic. And then they don't want to stop talking. You're like, man, like, I've been talking for like 10 minutes. Damn, like, that's why my pastor said not to give the mic away. Right? So, like, because nobody's ever allowed them to have their voice heard in the space. So they've got more than enough
Exactly.
to be able to say. Right? But it's the person that's, like, wielding power that oftentimes, like, says nothing. And then, like, where are you betraying your community when it comes to our folks? Where are you betraying your community because you've been called to the room and you have nothing to say, right? And like really think about, like, who have you let down in that space? But then also like, how have you disrespected God because God allowed you to be in the space and you saw fit to say nothing?
That is so powerful.
Yeah. It's like you're called for a purpose, but, what's your Christian integrity or an identity? Because we all have these invisible identities. So you're allowed to be in a space to drive and operate, and you did nothing with your power. It's a waste of time and space.
Parable of the 10 talents, and you just buried it in the soil.
Yes. And I just had this aha moment when you started talking. I really heard you say putting your faith into action in the community is really just bringing love to the community, showing love to the community, showing God's love to the community is putting your faith in action. Like that just like I was just like, oh my gosh, I get it now.
Right. And what does love really look like? Like, is love, like, love doesn't beat you over the head. No. Right. Love isn't something that is damning, that is condemning, that is judgmental. Right. Yeah. Now, love isn't always peaceful. Right. Like you think about like the relationships that you have with the people that you love, like accountability is love. Right. And so if accountability is love, love is also truth. Right. So it should be a space where you're able to speak your truth. Right. But love is not like, looking at the person and like I said, like beating them over the head with your dogma and damnation. That's not what people need.
Well, I think that's part of the issue right there.
You don't want to force a person into it. So, and it's in that same essence, one way that I think about it is it's more unconditional. So, and again, when you have that unconditional love, you understand the ebbs and flow of life. So again, we all say God is love. And then if we manifest ourselves, we're children of God, we're bringing that love to our village unconditionally, not saying that, hey, I'm only going to do this based on those conditions. I can only show up under these contexts. Show up.
Right. Now think about this though, like to take this a level deeper. Right. So love is also radical. Right. Love is vulnerable and it's sometimes uncomfortable. Yep. Right. And so are we bringing love into the space if the love that we're doing is truly just based from a space of charity? Yeah. Right. And so like I talk about this in, working in homeless services. Right. Yeah. One of the things that you see a lot of people, and no shade to anybody who's doing, like we need people to also do volunteer work. Yes. Right. So I don't want to say that that's what I'm saying. Right. But like when you think about folks that come in to do like, so during the holiday season, oftentimes people come down and do street feedings, right?
Yeah. The food drives.
Right. Yep. They do the food drive. They got their whole, I think about a time 2 summers ago, somebody brought down a crate of watermelons and
watermelons?
And it was watermelons and I think like corn, right? Now, I want you to really think about, but let's just focus on the watermelon piece, right? So I bring down whole watermelons, right? And we're not even getting into the like racial component of this bunch of black folks and I'm feeding watermelons. We're not even getting into that. I'm bringing down watermelons to feed homeless people who like, do they have a knife? Right? Like, okay, like it's 130 degrees outside, because I'm on
watermelon
the
thing. Yeah.
Right. Is watermelon what I need? Is watermelon, like, how long is that watermelon going to be good for? Right. And so then I gave this watermelon that, like, here you go. Here's this 15-pound watermelon, right? Oh, okay. I got this giant watermelon that I crack open maybe on the sidewalk or something of that nature, which creates a larger mess that then, like, you've got vermin that are coming because there's watermelon every damn where. And watermelon's not a clean, like, food to eat either.
Not even
so, I mean,
bit.
but I feel good. Because I brought watermelon
and corn.
It's the moral checklist.
Yeah,
that moral compass. I did a thing.
I did a thing, but like love isn't that, because that's like bringing you roses and you're allergic to them, but you're like, hey, you're like thanks for the roses.
Yes,
right. You're like, why don't you like these roses? Right. You're like, well, I'm allergic. Right. So it's not an act of love. It's very selfish as opposed to being selfless. Right. So how do we do the real love work?
Yeah, and it's so funny because as you guys were talking about this, all I was thinking to myself is like, oh, well, that's why people have trouble, serving the community is they don't know how to love in the first place. And so they're giving their broken love to the community in broken ways. And it's so funny because you just illustrated one way that can show up. And it's like, it's love. I can only liken it to, I feel like we've all been in that relationship, especially if you're a woman, where I was once in a relationship with someone who loved to give me things that they wanted to give me, but they were never things that I wanted, liked, and they knew me really well. And they knew, and like, I would do things to try to help them win because they took it very personally if I wasn't overjoyed. But like, they would give me stuff like the watermelon, like, in theory, but that it didn't match me, and then they were very upset because that was in their idea. Like, I showed love. It's like, but it doesn't reflect like care. It's like, I gave this to you so that I could feel good. I wanted you to cheer me on and say you're a hero because I gave this to you. But I didn't really think about what you would have wanted.
Yeah. So let me put it like, let me just close the loop. So people can think about this, because this like real world application. So that season comes up where everybody's like, okay, I want to get involved and I'm going to do work in the homeless community. And so I'm going to bring my kid because I think like my kid needs to see.
My kid sees me doing this thing. My kid needs to see
me doing this thing. And, they'll see homeless people and they'll be like, see, you don't want to end up like Jimmy. Right. So there's this whole like
no disrespect to anyone named Jimmy
component of it. Right. So I'll have this conversation where I'm like, so if you want to bring your kids, you should probably go to the family shelter. You probably shouldn't go to the zone. And they're like, well, like, I should come because that's what I want my kid to see. I'm like, so let me explain to you why you don't bring your kid down. You don't bring your kid down there because of the number of people that are experiencing mental illness, right? But also there's this thing about like folks that are unsheltered that are unsheltered because they're sex offenders. And not that I'm worried about that about how that sex offender does something to your kid, but more so the fact that when you post your picture on social media of your kid around the sex offender, then the PO sees that the kid was around the sex offender, and then he uses that thing to lock that person back up, right? Because they didn't report it, because you wanted to bring your kid down. And now as a result of that, because HUD views being in jail as being better than being homeless. So now the list that they're on to get housing, they went back down to the bottom of the list because they did over 90 days. So now you've like destroyed their chance of getting housing. But your kid feels, that they don't want to be homeless when they grow up, and you feel like you did a good thing. Right? And then they get mad at me like, well, like, I still want to bring my kid. I'm like, you're not listening.
Yeah.
Right? And so like, you've got to be able to think about like, really, like, if we're in love, right? Because the problem is that so many folks will come down there in the space of, I'm doing my good Christian work.
Yeah.
Right. And so, because I'm doing my good Christian work, that's why I'm going to come and do. And I'm like, no, like, do that elsewhere. Right. We can figure out ways to get you on the campus or like give you an experience that you need to have. But that's not love, because that's not rooted in something for the individual. That's just rooted in you.
Yeah.
One thing that I think that what you're hinting to and what you're calling out is people try to adopt what they call the golden rule, the golden rule of love, of like, hey, I'm going to love you how I choose you want to be loved. as opposed to the platinum rule is I want to love you how you want to be loved. And when we give back to the community, that's the same thing that we have to apply. We have to understand what the community needs is, and not necessarily saying that, hey, it's boots to the ground, knowing what people want. Sometimes you got to take a step back. You got to look at that bird's eye view. How do you truly make an impact? And that's what people oftentimes don't really check in. You're not self-aware of what's truly happening. You think, well, because I did the thing and I got my Superman cape on and everything and the S on my chest, I'm doing a great thing. Well, to that point you just mentioned, how impactful was it?
Yeah.
Because again, you may have impact that one person, but you just caused 7 people a situation where they can't get housing now. So what do you do going forward? How do you plant new seeds? How do you recreate the wheel of the understanding?
Wow, that's so powerful. Oh my gosh. Okay. Loving this conversation way more than I knew I would. So here's what's striking me right now is if I'm someone out there who's listening to this episode and I really want to get active in my community, I really want to bring God's love to my community. How do I go about doing that? Like, what do I do?
Show up.
Okay.
I was thinking the same thing. Just show up.
Normally I say less, but say more.
No, it's just, I mean, that's literally it. Just show up, right? And like far too many of us are sitting at home. Right. We're sitting at home. I say a lot, like, I believe that this, it's not even this generation, this culture at this time. We have really, really strong hands and really weak legs. Right.
I love that.
Because we here, right? But we're not showing up. We're not in the space, right?
So we're on our phones. We're doing things like virtually, but we're not willing to get up and go into the spaces that need us.
Yes.
It's in the generation now. And I think for myself, having kids now, it's even more mindful because, again, we talk about stuff like AI, like, oh, AI is great because AI can do all of these things now. Well, that is true, but that's just one less thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
So when we start to think about things that, reduce the margin of lines that need to like really get the needle going in the right direction, how are you showing up? Now you're going to rely on someone else to identify what you should be doing or what you could be doing. Now, that's not fair. That's not fair to the individual. It's not fair to anyone in that sense, because again, you authentically can't be yourself. Now you have to become someone else. Now you have to put on your porcelain mask to show up in the community like, hey, well, I'm still here now. I'm going to do a thing because, I got off my butt, because again, in the generation now, I'm not just going to be useless in a sense.
Yeah. So like the question becomes like, from a faith standpoint, like pray and work, right? And so from a prayer standpoint, like having your prayer life be good, where you're asking God, like, God, reveal the opportunities to me, right? Mm-hmm. So that I can like show up in the spaces that you want me to show up in.
Yeah.
Right. And then like ask yourself, like, what's happening? Like, we're a mindfulness generation. So like, what's happening in your body?
I challenge that one though.
Okay.
Because I love that. Okay. Because the reason why I challenge that, Richard, correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
Not saying anyone is more holy or more humble than the other, but in my life, when you show up in life, I just feel like how things are resonated, things come to you. Yeah. Things start to draw to you naturally.
That too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So I believe that if from a multi-faith standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Whether we talk about law of attraction, whatever we're talking about, right? Like, are you putting yourself in position, right, to be able to serve? Okay. And then think about what I was going to say is like when you think about like the things within your everyday that are bothering you, right? When you're thinking about like, where's injustice and inequity present in your everyday, right? And so like, I believe like Jeremiah said, be like fire, shut up in my bones, right? So if that's the case, then like, it's going to lead me in that particular space, right? So then now I've got a guiding light to be able to show me like where I need to go, right? And then like how I show up in the space, then acknowledging wherever I go into, right? And this could be political, this could be socioeconomic stuff, this could be community groups, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Remembering it's not about me.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't show up and be like, hey, I'm here. Y'all so glad that you got me, right? Like, I'm in the business. I'm in the space, right? Selfie, right? Like, that's not how we show up in the space, right? Okay. But like really letting God guide you in terms of where you go. and then showing up in a way that is authentic, that is humble, right? That is willing to be taught, right? Don't show up as the subject matter expert and you don't even know how to say the name of the organization that you're going to. I've had those conversations with people where they like, oh, this is what I need. And I'm like, you're talking to the boss per se, right? So, well, I'm telling you, and I'm like, I'm telling you, that's not what you need to do down here. I'm here every single day, right? And so, like, that's the stuff we need to stay home. But the stuff we need to come out is, like I said, how do you come in a humble spirit and then be willing to like stick your hands in it and get dirty? You know what I'm saying? Like Jesus, when you think about like the miracles, like Jesus, he was like spitting in the dirt and like spitting in his hands and shit. Like it was nasty. It wasn't like ministry isn't clean necessarily, right? And so you have to be willing to do the grimy work in order to do the work that may be more clean and crisp and fly, right? But you got to be willing to do the grimy work first.
Yeah. And I really like that because it resonates back with what you said before. Before the episode started, you were talking to me a little bit about how we serve in our churches, right? And one of the things that you had said is like, it should be an extension of something you already know how to do or do well or like to do. And I hear you saying like, show up authentically. And that's what's resonating in my head. Like if you are someone who naturally does something well, like bring that to the community, offer that up to the community. I mean, that's your best right there is that thing that you already do well. If you're offering it up to God at church or in other places, that is where you can also bring that skill to the community.
So recognizing that the world doesn't qualify you, God does, right? And so there are things that you have that you can do. There are the things that you're dreaming of. There's the things that you want to do. Yeah. And you're like, I'm looking for an opportunity to be able to do this. Meanwhile, this opportunity is staring you in the face, right? Right here. You're like, hey, like, God, I want my job to be able to see like that I can do this. But meanwhile, this thing in your community is staring you in the face, right? And so like, because what I talked about was like, so like oftentimes you'll see as far as the history of the Black church, right? You might have been the secretary or like a housekeeper Monday through Friday, 65 hours a week, right? Because there wasn't nobody working 40 hours a week, right? Yeah. So you might have been that. But then at the church, you were the accountant. At the church, you were the lead steward. You were the trustee. You were those types of things, right? Because God takes those things that are within you, right? And he waters that seed and allows that harvest to be able to take place. So there's things that are going on that are in your life that are in your spirit that you're burning, feeling this level of dissatisfaction because you're not doing it. And God's like, yeah, because I want you to go do the work in the world. Yes. Right. I want you to go do the work in the world, to go transform the world, to go do kingdom. Like that's what you're supposed to be doing. And the reason why you feel so unfulfilled is because you're not doing that.
Yes. Go do that.
Right. Right. You are more than what you are those 40 hours a week. Yeah. Right. And that's the beauty of the church is that the church gave you that. Like before we got so professionalized in the church. Right. Like that was the beauty of it. So like your 9 to 5 and some because you got like 17 different businesses. Right. Isn't sound ministry.
No.
Right. But for years now at your church, you've been doing sound ministry. So now you know how to run a soundboard. You know what to do with all of those things. You know how to do production. You know how to do these things because you had the audacity to operate in your faith, to walk on water when somebody was like, oh, Jessica, you're going to do that. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to do that. Right. And then you did it. And then you learned how to do it like better and better. Because if you keep your eyes on Jesus and not on the water, that you're not supposed to be able to know how to do that. Right. Like you can get to him.
Yes.
Right. We can build kingdom in that way. But we have to have the faith to continue to walk and to focus on like, this is what God told me to do. So I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to like thinking about the world's telling me I can't do all of these things.
I love it. So what are some resources as we bring this to a close? If somebody were looking at, okay, I'm sold. I want to show the community love in the way that the community needs love, wants to see love, platinum rule, all of that jazz. But they were like, okay, but God's going to speak to me and all, but how do I, give them some fuel? Where can they find out about ways to get involved in the community, places to get involved, needs of the community? Who do they reach out to? How do they start?
So I'm going to plug Rell really quick, right? Mm-hmm. Because Rell's organization is in every major city center across this country. And granted, like, Jessica, you like worldwide, so it's not just like limited in that particular way, but like Urban League Young Professionals is an amazing organization to plug into.
Yes,
right?
it is.
Like it is an amazing organization to plug into to get that like where you are with like-minded people that are doing all kinds of work in all kinds of spaces and all kinds of industries and sectors and to be able to have that influence. I would also say that organizations need to plug more into the young professional organizations that are taking place, because like I've talked to my boards so the Human Services Campus, or Key Campus as it's now called, that's 16 different organizations on 13 acres doing work to end homelessness through the power of collaboration, right? And so, but in that space, I'm like, that's also 16 different governing boards.
Yeah.
Ooh,
right?
ouch.
So if there's 16, no. Like,
No, they work together well?
It's not about that.
Okay.
It's not ouch, it's ooh. And the
Okay.
reason why it's ooh is because those 16 different organizations need young professional. Like those are opportunities for young professionals to come in, stake their claim, and start doing governance work.
Got it.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like there's so many opportunities for young adults and young professionals to plug in. So like that's one way that I would just say folks to be able to plug in.
You can see where my head instantly went. I was like, oh, too many chefs in the kitchen.
No.
Yeah. It starts at the place of knowing where the pulse is at. For me, I would say getting more familiarity around organizations, more city officials in a sense. So understanding, going to like your local chapter meetings, going to see like town hall meetings, understanding what impact does to the community. So again, we speak around education needs. So again, have you been to different districts to understand what their needs and assessments are? When you talk about, homeless situations, have you been to some of the town hearings around there? When we talk about food deprivations and a few other things on those calibers, what are you doing to show up each and every time? So again, get more ingrained in what the need is before just showing up.
Yeah.
Because again, we can be utilized in different ways. So again, understand how you can be a conduit of serving, but again, know what you're serving for.
Yeah, know what you're serving for. Right. But like, so if you're a parent, for example, like, are you on your school's BTA? Do your kids' teachers even know you exist? Right. Because we do not exist in a world anymore where we could just send our kids to school and trust that the institutions are serving them. Like if you're not advocating for your kid is being eaten by the institution. Whether private, charter,
cool,
public,
way.
like all of those types of things, right? And so like we have to be able to understand that. So like, are you showing up in that way? Are you going from whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or whatever else? Like, are you going to those legislative district meetings so that you understand like, okay, like am I a precinct committee person? Like there's so many different ways to just plug in. Right. Yeah. And like, I mean that even from a standpoint, from an elected standpoint, right? So you see like in the appointment process, you realize, because I was able to sit in as a part of the one of the Senate appointments that happened last election cycle, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a second, we picked from these 6 people, right? It was the 6 people that applied. We threw off 3, we kept 3, right? And then those go up. But like realizing it would have been that easy for somebody to get in. There's so many times that we're sitting at home. Yeah. Right? Thinking that, it's so like the issue is so insurmountable. I could never do that. And it's like, actually, if you just show up, it's just like being on your job where you got promoted through attrition because everybody else got fired. And all of a sudden you became the district manager and you was like, well, how'd you do that? Well, like God moved everybody else out the way. Mm-hmm. Right. And so now I'm in this space, right? Like you just have to show up, but those who don't show up don't get called, right? Yeah. You can't be Steph Curry and keep the ball in your hands all the time. There's no shot that gets made if you don't shoot it. That's why it's called a shot.
Okay. He's really good at analogies, like way better than I am. Mine are terrible. You making your point.
You're better at businesses, so.
I'm way better.
Yeah, we're better at businesses.
Decent at businesses.
There we go.
Awesome. This was a great conversation. I feel like I not only learned a lot, but I got some resources. I mean, I can put all of these resources on a list, pray on the list, and see where God wants to use me. And I really appreciate your time today and chatting with me a little bit about this topic. I feel like I learned a lot about showing up in the community. What I heard you say, let me recap for you. We show up in the community with our faith through love. And it's an authentic love. It's where we bring our authentic selves there and we bring our gifts to the community and we show love in the way that the community needs to receive love, that platinum rule. I was listening. And it's so important as we go out into the community because it's bigger than just volunteering. It's bigger than just giving money. It's really about bringing your gifts to the community in ways that we need it. And especially as we talk about communities that are up to something and have movements that need support, there are ways that your gifts are needed critically. And that's the way that you can put your faith into action in the community is by bringing those gifts that you have to the community, whether it's getting your hands dirty or being in the boardroom or maybe both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
remember, like when we're talking about our tithe,
Yeah.
it's time, talent, and treasure.
Yep.
It's not treasure. It's time, talent, and treasure.
Now that's a whole episode right there.
It is.
So thank you both for joining me today on this conversation.
Yeah.
And thank you for joining me. We really appreciate having you as part of this conversation. And we encourage you to lean in, join the conversation, comment, like, share this conversation with someone else who's looking to get involved in the community. And we'll see you the next time on the next Faith and Fire.